Well, here we are, the days after Easter, the resurrection. And this year happened to land at the same time, pretty much as Passover for the Jewish people. What does the empty tomb mean for you and for me? And what does the cross signify that's withstood the time for 2,000 years? Today we're going to dig into a few of the deeper things with Easter, maybe you didn't know, but most importantly, what does that mean for us? There's a lot of things going on in the world right now, and a lot of people are wondering, and they have a lot of questions. Tune in today as we uncover all those fascinating things.
Hi, I'm Kristen.
And I'm Penny. Welcome to
Live Life in the Spirit. We are super excited that you've come to our site today.
Either on purpose or happy accident.
If you're looking for
Real truth,
real joy, real Jesus, you've come to the right place.
Hi, I'm Pastor Penny Schulz.
And I'm Kristen Kipper.
And welcome to
Live Life in the Spirit.
We're so glad you're joining us today. We are so excited about what we're going to be talking about, because I really get charged up when we talk about anything with Palm Sunday and resurrection. But most importantly, there's some heavy things on our hearts, and I know that there is on yours as well. So we're going to tackle all those tough issues. But we want you first to make sure that you know where you can go to find us. Tell your friends, like and subscribe, hit the button down below. It'll take you to our website,
livelifeinthespirit.com. Not only can you find our podcast there, but all of our inspiring blogs as well.
And we even have merchandise, because you know what? God is not done writing your story. So quit trying to steal that pen. Also, if you are looking for some shorter inspirational things, be sure to go to my Facebook page, Penny Block Schulz, and look at the long short of it. I think we're going to be putting it on the website too eventually.
That's the plan. And you can also, if you're looking for a joy break or just little fun bits of inspiration, you can find that on our Facebook page, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok, all at Live Life in the Spirit.
Because everybody needs just a little bit of joy, especially with the heavy stuff that we're going to be talking about.
It's true.
We thought we'd just dive right in now with Easter being over on Sunday. I don't know how many of you actually had the opportunity to go to worship service. If you have not, had some very inspiring services that maybe we can do a link to that you
absolutely.
can catch, and even including a very chilly Easter sunrise service at about 7 o'clock in the morning.
And we've also have 2 vodcasts that we highlighted over the last couple of weeks that we went through in great detail from Palm Sunday to Resurrection, all of the just incredible ways that God fulfilled every single piece of the puzzles that He created and put into place millennia before Christ came on the scene.
And you know, you always find yourself going, man, I've learned all this. What more could I possibly learn from that one passage? And yet, every year, there's something even more. One of the things I wanted to bring out was the 30 pieces of silver that Judas betrayed Jesus for. We know the 30 pieces, and I'm pretty sure on the other vodcast, we talked about the Pidyon Haben, which was from the redemptive pool. When a young child was brought at 8 days old, the firstborn son, to the temple to be circumcised, they had to pay this Pidyon Haben, which was the redemption of the son, meaning that the parents, if they wanted to buy their son basically back from God, if they wanted to claim him back, they would pay a sacrifice of silver coins. I don't know the exact amount of what that was back 2,000 years ago, but then they would take their son back. If you did not pay the money, then when they were old enough and they were weaned or whatever, they would give them to the temple and they would serve as priest. When Judas betrayed Jesus, that silver came from the Pidyon Haben stash.
The temple treasury.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Now one may say, well, what's so big about that? Because before the high priest could actually have Jesus back to be able to crucify him, they had to buy him back. They had to give back the money that had been given to reclaim Jesus. But there's something more that I learned. I always wondered what the 30 pieces was about. Do you want to tell?
Sure. So actually 30 pieces of silver at that time would have been the price of a slave.
And that was a full year's wage. Jesus to them was a slave or servant. And we know the part when Jesus was hanging on the cross, and he said, I am thirsty, and they went to give him, they dipped a sponge on a hispus branch and stuck it to his lips that had sour wine on it. There's two things with that. They used the sour wine, it was mixed with like a myrrh, it was supposed to be like a pain reliever, sedative kind of. That wasn't why Jesus said that, because he didn't actually drink, he just had it touch his mouth. The hispus is what was used during the Exodus for the very first Pesach, the very first threshold covenant, that Passover. They used the hispus to dip it into the lamb's blood to put it up over the doorpost. It was the hispus that was used to lift up the sponge, but there was even more to that. The reason why that had to be put on his mouth for him to drink from. If you remember in the Last Supper, when Jesus sat with his 12 closest, he came to the different cups, and we talked about how the third cup represented the old covenant with God and Moses and the Israelite people. It was called the cup of redemption, the cup of salvation. It was that particular cup that Jesus lifted up, he gave thanks, he blessed it, and then he said, this is going to be a new covenant. It's going to be my blood, not the Paschal lamb, that will be shed for the forgiveness of all sin. Every time you drink of this, do this in remembrance of me. And that's where we stop. But he added something else.
He said, I will not drink of this again until I drink it anew with you in my Father's kingdom. So he couldn't drink wine then on the cross, because then that would have made what he said not true.
But the last cup of the meal was the fulfillment. He drank that last cup by the very act, completing that Seder meal. So the cup of the new covenant, that third cup, would not be drinking until he was in heaven. But that fourth cup was actually finished
on the cross.
And then there's another,
I don't think I did. Did you just learn that this year?
Yeah. And then the other part with Jesus saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? I've heard so many sermons on this growing up. And it was always about because Jesus had taken on the sin, and there was that separation, and there was that moment where God had to part from him. You know, I've always struggled with that, because we said that Jesus took on the sin, but he got rid of the sin, but this is still all the world's sin. He took it all on, but the world still had all that sin. So if that were the case, God wouldn't be able to look at us at any point in time, because we would be so full of sin.
Right.
I struggled with that. But I learned something very interesting. Back in the Jewish time, they didn't have Bibles like we have. They didn't have the Torah that everybody had in their home. They had to memorize the scripture, but they wouldn't memorize passages. There were no chapters, there were no verses. So you would start a passage and they'd memorize this, and then they knew the rest of it. So you wouldn't have to say the whole thing. You could just say one part of it, and everybody else's mind started following. So if I was to do the Lord's Prayer and I said, Our Father who art in heaven, I made a statement, but where would your mind go?
Hallowed be thy name.
You go through the whole Lord's Prayer. If I said, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, where would your mind go?
He leadeth me beside still waters. No.
It would do the whole 23rd Psalm. So when Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me? That was actually talking about Psalm 22. Way more than that. It starts out with David saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? But then it goes on to talk about the entire prophecy of the Messiah. How cool is that? It talks about no bones would be broken. It was talking about but he would be displayed for all to see. He would be despised. He'd be mocked. He'd be rejected. That they would take his garments and they would cast lots, and his bones would be out of joint, and that his side would be pierced for all to see. There's something else about the I am a worm, but I gotta save something for next year. There's another tidbit to that. He says, I am a worm, not a man. It's a special worm, and it's something very, very special with that worm that's in conjunction with the blood on the cross. Again, I gotta have a teaser for next year. So when Jesus was there hanging on the cross, at the very last bit, with most all of his life out of him, he is still quoting scripture and prophesying to them, showing them the prophecy that this is him who has come. He is the Messiah.
And it's being fulfilled as they were standing there.
Yeah. So then we're going to jump to after Jesus said it is finished. He breathes his last. And then it says the sky had been dark for several hours, but then there was this huge earthquake, and it was so big that it says the rocks were splitting, and we know that it tore the veil in the temple in two from top to bottom.
The doors came unhinged.
Right. So now that barrier was gone immediately,
right,
the minute Jesus died. But in Matthew 27, it says something really cool, and I wanted to read this. We hear this every Good Friday, but most of us just kind of jump over this part. We don't think about it too much.
And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. And the blood landed on the mercy seat. No, that doesn't say that here. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. When the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God."
This passage in Matthew, how many of us just read it and that's where it just gloss right over it?
Until this year.
Or you're thinking, tomb splitting, coming open, and it's like ghosts coming out and wandering around.
Yeah, I kind of envisioned the spirits of the people who had died. That's not
what it says,
No.
and that's not what I think the Greek says.
Mm-hmm.
It was the bodies of holy ones. We're not talking about patriarchs. We're not even talking about people who have been dead for a year or whatever. I mean, we don't know how the time frame was,
right,
which ones were brought up. This happened just a week or two after Lazarus was raised from the dead. Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. What the scholars project is that these were people who had just died recently.
How recently, whatever that means, it's kind of like soon.
Exactly. But when the power of his or when he lifted up his spirit, there was so much power, as I said, it busted open the rocks and it brought these people back. It resurrected them. However, they did not come out. Yeah, it's two events. That power resurrected them, but they do not come out of their tombs until Jesus is completely resurrected. And then when the stone is rolled away and Jesus comes out, it says, then the tombs were open. The earth shook, the rock split, the tombs broke open. Then it says, the bodies of the holy ones who had died were raised to life. So there's life in them now.
They came out of the tombs.
They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people.
Oh. So they had life, but they were stuck in their tombs until he resurrected?
Well, life had been come back to them, but I don't think that they were probably mentally there yet. I don't know.
They were, then they were stuck in their tombs for 3 days. That would have stunk. Literally.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. That would give a whole new level of emotional trauma.
Emotional damage. No, sorry. I listened to it and thought about it more this year, but I didn't piece together that it was talking about they had life in them, and then after Jesus resurrected,
then the stones were rolled away, and then they came out and went into the city. Now, Jesus had come out. Mm-hmm. He appeared there's in 4 gospel accounts. He appears to the women, then he appears to other women, then he appears to Mary Magdalene. I mean, there's all these different accounts. That doesn't mean that they're all contradictory.
No.
It just means it's written down by different people. Mm-hmm. He was everywhere. He was popping around. Mm-hmm. He shows up on the road to Emmaus with 2 of the people who had followed him. They weren't of the 12, but they were 2 disciples. Mm-hmm. And then he shows up
in the upper room
at night after supper and appears to the disciples.
Minus Thomas.
Exactly. So he just keeps showing up. The reason why he had to resurrect first before the people that came out of the tombs was because he was the first fruits. And this is kind of cool. I don't know. Did we talk about this on the other one?
Oh, I don't remember because
there's a lot.
Because you talked about it on Good Friday and Easter Sunday, and I don't remember if I also heard it in the podcast.
There's a reason why Jesus had to resurrect on the first day of the week, because it was another Jewish holiday. So they were in Jerusalem for the Passover, but then there was this holiday that they observed that was called First Fruits, Yom Rishon, Rishit,
and it was the first day of the week following the Passover.
And what that was, it was ushering in the spring harvest. And so the farmers would go into their fields and they would cut, because they couldn't on Saturday, it was the Sabbath. So Sunday they would go out, they would cut a bundle, a sheaf, and they would bring it into the temple and they would give it to the priest. The priest would lift it up, they would give thanks, and they would bless it, and they would consecrate it. And because that sheaf was consecrated, then all of the harvest that came after that was also consecrated. So when Jesus resurrects on the first day of the week, on first fruits, because he is consecrated,
the harvest is also consecrated.
Even another tidbit. It's called the 8th day. Now the Jewish people had been observing this for millennial, not even knowing. It was called the mystery day. They didn't even know what the day was. The 8th day. How can you have 8 days in a 7-day week?
Do tell.
It's only on the first fruits. It's only that one day. And it's because it means what comes after. New beginnings. They didn't realize that they were celebrating, and maybe they did, the Messiah. But then when Jesus comes and he is resurrected on the first fruits on the 8th day, it's what comes after new beginnings.
That's right. And also a little foreshadowing again that he is coming back.
Perfect. That's why there were so many Jews, even in spite of everything, in spite of the persecution or the threats from the high priest. They saw all this. They were putting together the pieces, realizing that not only did everything he said he did before work into prophecy in the scriptures, but so did everything after his resurrection. That's like super cool. I want to get back to the stones rolling away from the tombs. These were not little stones. These were huge. It took many men to try to roll the stones or this big flat one in front of the opening.
Ready? 1, 2, 3. Come on!
When Mary and the women go to the tomb that morning, what is the first thing that's on their mind?
How are they going to roll away the stone?
Exactly. They were women. They could not roll that stone away. And they were wondering if maybe they could get maybe the guards to do it. But when they get there, what did they see?
The stone has already been rolled away. It's open. And then they're worried that someone stole the body.
Now, depending on the account, some say there was an angel that was on top of the stone. I would say, I don't think this is a contradictory. I think there were multiple angels around. Mm-hmm. Angels could have rolled the stone, but there was another kind of an earthquake, a little bit, But inside, there were 2 angels. And where were they?
They were on each end of the slab that Jesus' body would have been laid on. That seems kind of a familiar image.
Yes, there's a connection, because on the top of the Ark of the Covenant, the mercy seat, what do we have?
Cherubim on each
Two
side.
cherubims, two angels.
I'm not as good at cherubim right now.
Two cherubims on either side of the Ark of the Covenant. The same as Jesus' tomb, there were two angels sitting on either side. And we've talked about the linen, and we've talked about the napkin.
If you haven't listened to that, please go and listen to our podcast on Palm Sunday through Resurrection, because there's just so much there.
So many things. It'll blow your mind if you have not heard this. It does not change the story in any way. It broadens it and deepens it and it makes you realize how many of the little teeny tiny things that God has fulfilled that we don't even know.
Especially as Christians in the modern day, because we don't know our Jewish heritage, which it really is our Jewish heritage, because everything we do is steeped in some sort of Jewish feast or culture or piece of what they practiced and celebrated, because he just fulfilled all of that.
There's so many things in the scriptures where, no, it's not spelled out for us. It didn't need to be, because it wasn't, at that time, it wasn't written for us. I mean, yes, the Bible's for us, but they were writing to a Jewish audience who knew these things.
Right.
So they could just, like Jesus, my God, why have you forsaken me? They knew how to fill in the pieces. I always liken it to, we live in Nebraska. Football's not as big of a deal as it used to be. But they would always talk about, during football Saturday, in Lincoln, the Sea of Red. Now, if you're not from Nebraska, we are the red and white Cornhuskers. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing else to do in Nebraska. So everybody got together behind the college team. We don't have any professional teams here. And that town of Lincoln would go from 100,000 to just a stadium having 86 to 94,000 people in it. And so the Sea of Red would be everybody walking down the streets of Lincoln all in their red. We know what that means. If we were to write an article in the paper and you just said, the fall, in September, the Sea of Red is back, everybody knows what they're talking about. Husker football and all the people.
But if you took it 100 years from now, and maybe...
Or anywhere else.
Right. If you put it even probably out on the East Coast or across the world, they would think, they have a red sea. I wonder what makes it red.
And then they go, wait a minute, they are completely landlocked and have no water. They have a red sea. But it all depends on how your sentence structure is. Mm-hmm. A sea of red, a red sea. Mm-hmm. Again, it's something very simple like that, but when we don't understand their sentence structure, and sometimes when we do the translation, we don't have the words that they do, and so it takes us a whole sentence to try to describe what we think that one word means. Just like we have the word love, and in Greek, love can mean four or five
at least different. And we use that one word to cover all of it. From I love my
French
dog.
Fries.
Yeah. I love French fries to I love my spouse. I mean, they're all the same.
I know I've said this now twice. Getting back to Matthew 27. So Jesus has been popping up. Picture it now. The first day, first fruits, and the people are in their homes. They're getting ready to have a meal, and they're out and about, and all of a sudden they see their Ema, or their Abba, or their uncle, or a sibling, or a best friend, walking the streets. And this is not ghost.
No, these are like their physical bodies.
Flesh and blood. This
walking
is
around.
Lazarus.
All over
again.
In multiple.
Yes. That is, and nobody talks that much about that. It said it was seen by many. I mean, all these people, and these people stayed alive. See, when I would read it, way back when, I always thought, well, maybe they were like ghosts, and then they just went up to heaven, or, I don't know. I didn't know what it was.
Didn't give a lot of thought to it.
Yeah, it was all in the spirit form. No, we have to think Lazarus. And just like Jesus raised Lazarus, and then he died again. That's the same thing with these people. The power of Jesus. When Jesus stood outside the tomb of Lazarus, he said to Martha, he said, do you believe that your brother will rise? And she goes, yes, I realize in the resurrection, the last day. He says, no. I am the resurrection. I am the life. Those who believe in me will never die, and those who die will live. Do you believe this? And I am sure that's why he didn't have a problem for his disciples to gather full steam of everybody. It just kept solidifying what they believed all along, that he was the Messiah.
Can you imagine what life must have been like in the holy city in those days following all of that happening?
No. I mean, how do you keep that quiet? When the very guards went to the chief priest and said, he's gone. And we saw angels. And what do we do? And
They were like,
said, yeah,
don't tell
we'll
anyone.
pay the governor, we'll pay you, we'll pay the governor, you're not going to get in trouble. We'll just tell everybody that his disciples came and stole him in the middle of the night.
Right.
And it said that message is still being circulated to this day. Well, obviously, when the disciples were writing this, it was. They were trying everything they could to hush what really was going on. They had a narrative, they had a spin, they had a doctrination that they were pushing. Boy, does that sound familiar?
It does. Well, and I just got to thinking about, and it didn't matter how much evidence to the contrary.
They were not going to believe.
They just wouldn't. They would not.
And it was right there. They knew the prophecies. They knew the scriptures. They knew everything that he had fulfilled. But that's why Joseph of Arimathea, who was one of the Sanhedrin, he was a follower. Nicodemus, one of the highest ranking Pharisees and part of the Sanhedrin, was a follower. Those are just the two that we know. There were many others that had seen the light. Jairus, who was a scribe, he believed before Jesus even brought his daughter back to life. There was a stirring in their soul. And that's what I love about the two on the road to Emmaus. Even though Jesus is talking to them, just like Mary Magdalene, he's in the garden and she doesn't know it's him. She thinks he's a gardener. He's walking on the road with these two people. And they're having this big conversation and talking, and they don't get it until he sits down and has supper with them, and he breaks the bread. And it says it's at that point their eyes were open.
But I love what they say. They were like, we should have known. Wasn't there a burning in our heart?
That's why Mary knew. Not just the burning. Jesus had said something before he died. He said, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd laid down his life for his sheep. But my sheep know my voice. And when you read that scripture, and he says, he hasn't even turned around yet or looked at her. He just says, Mary. And by saying, well, it's Marie, by just saying her name, she knew her shepherd. And God knows your name too. And he is speaking. He has not been quiet. Problem is, we have so much noise and so much stuff going on in this world and vying for our attention, we're just not hearing him or open to hearing his voice. Because maybe he might have an answer that we don't want.
I know I don't post a ton on social media. I'm not someone who posts daily on my own personal page, but I usually post if there's a holiday or a special occasion or just when something strikes my fancy, I guess. And I really wanted to post something on Easter because I just felt like people needed to hear something. And yet I was struggling to find the words or to find what I felt like could get through all of the noise and the chaos, because there's so much division among Christians today. You know, and I've thought about that a lot over the last few days. You know, people talking about, Christ is peace. Actually, yes, the perfect peace that we can feel internally is from Christ, but he himself says that because of him, there will be division, even among families, amongst those who follow him and those who do not. But those who follow him are not supposed to be divided. We are supposed to be a united front. And I think I struggle more than anything right now with with the world and how much that is not the case.
And that goes in so many directions. People think that, oh, once I become a Christian, that's like, then a rose doesn't have thorns. No, Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble. But take heart, for I have overcome the world. He who is in us is greater than he who is in the world. I'm actually dealing with this issue right now with one of the denominations I serve. And I was point blank asked a question that I wasn't quite prepared for. I was prepared for that denomination's question on polity. But since I have served so many congregations and so many different denominations, they asked me, like I could summarize in a couple sentences, what the difference was with all the polity throughout all the denominations that I've had. And that was like an impossible question to answer. But what I wanted to tell them was, that's the problem. They're missing the point. We all serve the same risen Savior. We all serve the same empty tomb. We all serve the same empty cross. We serve Jesus Christ, who came for salvation. He came to take away the sin and to make a way for heaven. And we miss that because we're so busy nitpicking at everybody's little polity that we miss the whole big picture.
Mm-hmm. We are all sinners in need of that Savior. Period. Period.
And it's only through grace that we have been saved. It is only through Him that we have been justified and sanctified. Which is that weight that you were feeling when you were trying to write that. How do you sum up grace? How do you sum up justification? It's the legality. It's we are all sinners, and the verdict is death. The verdict is hell. But because Jesus paid our penalty, He took that spot. It didn't just disappear. He stepped in and took that judgment from us. So we were free.
And that reminds me of something that we've talked a little bit about this year, and for whatever reason, it just weighed on me a lot more. In the garden, when Jesus is praying, he asks God if he could take the cup from him. And he says, not my will, but yours. I never really thought about what that meant by the cup.
Just the having to go through the crucifixion.
Yeah.
But it was so much more.
It was. So that reference is used to talk about the very wrath of God, which is, in fact, the penalty. And the wages of what we have is to feel the full weight of the wrath of God. I've often thought about the physical pain and the anguish of taking on our sin and taking on that judgment, but I never thought about taking on the full wrath of God as being a part of that, and Him asking if it could not have to be that way, and yet still being willing to say, your will and not mine.
That is why He is the Son of God. Because in our own humanity, there is no way that anyone else could ever say that. Even people who we've seen throughout all of history who were martyrs and were willing to die, but
there's a difference.
There's a difference.
There is a difference.
Well, I know we've talked about some exciting things. We've talked about some heavy things. We've talked about stuff that maybe you've never learned before, but that's what gets me charged and what gets me excited is all these wonderful little tidbits because I can be assured that if God did not miss out on any one of these little tiny things that might be so minute that most people don't even know it's still there, then I know that I'm very minute in this world and in this time and space, and yet I'm still here and He still cares. He still sees, He still orchestrates things for the good of Him. And when I put my trust and my life in God's hands, I know that He is filling in all those pieces, not just in my life, but then all of those that I touch.
I think for me, it's another opportunity to really look at the vastness of God, that He stood back and He's been orchestrating all of that, every single detail, from the very beginning to the very end. And the fact that He knows my name, and that He knows the number of hairs on my head, and that My tears and my prayers are offered up to him. How amazing and humbling and incredible, and just like there's no words. What a mighty God we serve. And what a personal God we serve.
And what a loving and gracious God we serve. So we're so glad that you joined us this week. This is going to be kind of a two-parter, so make sure you stay tuned for next week as we really dive in more into what does this mean for us today. Hopefully you've learned something new, because once you know,
You can't unknow.
and you can't say,
We didn't tell you.
So until next time,
Shalom.